Alright, it's your buddy, Mike Messier. Well, trying to do a video, and people are always walking around listening to what I have to say, which is, trying to do a nice video here, and someone's walking around following after me. That's part of the problem these days. We have this thing in the world where we try to do things publicly but privately. I want to speak to strangers or anyone who's listening with my phone or my camera phone, but yet a real live human being is walking in my vicinity and I go scurrying off into the woods. I want to talk about women's wrestling. And why do we talk about women's wrestling at all? Well, it's exciting. It's a good part of the wrestling world. It's becoming an increasing part of the wrestling world is women's wrestling, and I think that's a good thing. If you've ever seen the film All the Marbles from the mid to late 70s with Peter Falk of Columbo fame, great movie actually, quite fun, and they show kind of the rigors of women's wrestling under the guise of it being a shoot and it's kind of a cool movie because they don't really break kayfabe altogether. They do show some women's wrestling tag team opponents. I think the California Dolls and their opponents in the dressing room kind of bickering back and forth. But they do it in a way that still keeps the integrity of the business. They're kind of like, we'll get you in that ring, and so it's kind of a cool movie. All the Marbles was probably, because when I was a youth, the women's wrestling was really marginalized. Missy Hyatt, and she wasn't even a women's wrestler per se. She was kind of an attraction, and she was attractive. But you had, the pretty Miss Elizabeth, and then for the actual women's wrestlers, not just the valets or the managers, you had, Sherry Martel was great, and Rockin' Robin and Medusa. But it always seemed like not Rockin' Robin wasn't even that great. But you never had these women at the same place at the same time, or very briefly. Sherry Martel, for instance, might defeat, a woman's. She might defeat Moolah, or Medusa defeated Sherry Martel for the AWA title, but you didn't have an extended program. I think the closest might have been back in 1989. The AWA did a little program where they had Wendy Richter came out of retirement or came out of the Nowheresville to fight Medusa several times. And that was a good little run. And then AWA didn't really stick around much longer after that. So on and so forth. This big Mae Young tournament, some people have even taken issue with the fact that it's named after Mae Young, saying that it was really, a PC, politically correct way of evoking some image of a long gone era. If they were really true, it would be called the Fabulous Moolah tournament, because Moolah had more of a title reign. But Moolah is now in her departure from life, controversial because some of her dealings and wheelings are being revealed to the surface. It's not so nice, not so seemly. Let's go back to the women's topic of today. It's painful because I see Charlotte as a great wrestler. Sasha Banks looks great, terrific. This does seem that Sasha, it seems like for the NXT audience, which I was not really a part of so much, they like Sasha as the heel champion, and to have her as the face, baby face, and always feuding with Charlotte for 2 years on Raw, it seemed like it was a little disappointing to people. People did respect that feud, but not get into it as much as maybe they could have. Bayley seems to be a big flop. Everyone seems to agree. I never liked Bayley, even when I would catch little clips of her. Just something about it was very Punky Brewster-ish. If anyone knows what Punky Brewster was, a show on in the 80s, I think on NBC on Sunday nights, and it was just about the little tomboy next door who was a little ruffian who would always get in trouble and wear crazy socks. And there was actually an interesting quote on Punky Brewster that I'll recite for you, since this is going nowhere. Henry, who was the old man that adopted Punky Brewster, one of the first episodes said to Punky, I would really love to adopt you. You're a cute little kid, but I really like being on my own. Even when I go to the opera, I buy an empty seat on either side of me in order that I don't get interrupted when I'm watching the opera. And little Punky looked up to him with those Punky Brewster puppy dog eyes and said, well, maybe someday when you're at the opera, you'll look to one of those empty seats and I'll be in it. So that's kind of cute. So, you know, and that's kind of the whole schmaltz with Bailey. You know, you can kick her around, you can beat her with a kendo stick, and she still comes back for more. I do think that if you took a look at some of the women of 20 years ago, 10 years ago, Misty Blue Sims, Medusa Michelli, or just Medusa, if they had that opportunity to be in the Becky Lynch spot or the Sasha Banks spot these days, you really have some awesome stuff. I mean, I think you can't make a time machine, but I mean, looking at Medusa, or like I said, Misty Blue Sims, even a Wendy Richter. Imagine if Wendy Richter from 1984 was where Becky Lynch is now. I mean, that would be incredible. Overall, I would say I'm a fan of women's wrestling. I do think that WWE screwed themselves big time with having the James Ellsworth thing. I did send a letter to the WWE admonishing them, if that's the word, condemning them, not condoning, but condemning them for their treatment of women's wrestlers with the James Ellsworth Money in the Bank match. I think it was really disgusting and reprehensible. You know, my friend of mine, I'll give him Moro, a friend, went to the women's Hell in a Cell match in Boston and said that it was just kind of tough because these 115, 130 pound women, namely Sasha and Charlotte, are trying to put each other at these tables, and they didn't take the time to pre-rig the table to make it a little easier to go through. So they kept bouncing off the tables, and the tables wouldn't break. So it does seem like women's wrestlers are caught in this never-world sometimes where in order for them, from whoever's perspective, to get over more and more, they have to do things that the men have done. For instance, a Hell in a Cell match or a ladder match. But yet when it comes down to it, either the promotion, the WWE, or the women themselves, but I don't think so, they don't fully trust them to do it. So they want to promote it. Like, we're going to have women's Hell in a Cell match. Are you going to juice? Are you going to blade? Are you going to do that? And then we're going to have a ladder match. Are you going to climb the ladder? I mean, so it just seems like, I don't know if having them do Iron Women matches, I think they even call them Iron Man matches. Why not call them an Iron Woman match? That's fine. I particularly think that these women are pretty damn good. I mean, I think Sasha and even Bailey, although I'm not a fan, she's kind of the Ronnie Garvin of wrestling. I think they're all very qualified, very top athletic. I think they bring a lot to the show. I think if anything, it's just the mishandling or the confusion of how to handle them with their careers. And where does that confusion come from? It always blame Vince is always the bottom line when it comes to this stuff. So I'll let you go with that. But as far as the Mae Young thing, I've canceled the WWE Network. I don't want to give them $120 a year for a shitty product if they're not going to do a better product. And I just think they've just failed. They have, world wrestling failure. That's the WWF now. They've just played themselves out. And women's wrestling is a victim to that. TNA wrestling, ironically, was always pretty good about women's wrestling, and I don't know if Global Force will continue that. I know Jeff Jarrett, in his long history, always seemed to have issues with women wrestlers, with China or whoever else. But maybe he's come around. Maybe Karen, Angle-Jarrett or whatever the fuck, if she's not yelling at Braun Strowman to sign an autograph, maybe she can do something with these women. So I do like women's wrestling. They talk about the Glow series on Netflix. I don't watch it. I don't have time. But I do think it's nice that they do a show like that, and people seem to be getting something out of it. I wonder if they'll ever do a WOW show. The Glow had a kind of a sister promotion that was a little more serious. And I don't know if anyone remembers that, but Powerful Women of Wrestling, POW, which even the acronym is off. But is anyone going to do POW next? All right, that's Mike Messier with your wrestling nostalgia. Not particularly insightful. I think I was thrown off course by that fucking asshole interrupting my vlog. A human being who kind of like just walked around, and I don't think they were really eavesdropping per se, but just in my vicinity. And I just don't like it when people are around me for the most part. So that's another issue for another time. But I'm going to drive out of here, and I'll give you a parting view of the marina. What am I going to do with my goddamn life? That's yet to be determined. There's things to do always. Driving by a fucking porta potty, which I've never used. I hate porta potties. In fact, when anyone brings up the idea of a porta potty, it disgusts me, and it pisses me off that people even think about asking other people to use a porta potty. Like, oh, I've got to use the restroom. Oh, there's a porta potty in the park. Why don't you just take a gun and shoot me in the fucking head? So that's about it. Have a good fucking Thursday, August 9th, 2017, the year of our Lord. There's a nice boat. And I'll talk to you later, assholes. See ya.